Chapter 1. The Unmapped Anomaly. The year was 1642. In the heart of Viridia, a city that prided itself on its burgeoning trade and an almost obsessive cataloging of the known world, Master Elias Thorne's study was a sanctuary of dust motes dancing in sunbeams and the scent of aging paper. It was a space where the world was not only observed, but meticulously, painstakingly rendered onto parchment. Elias, a man whose sharp eyes had seen more horizons on paper than most had seen in life, was hunched over his latest acquisition, a map so ancient its edges had softened to the consistency of silk. The map had arrived in a crate of discarded curios from a distant spice-laden port, unremarkable save for its age and the faded, almost ethereal quality of its ink. Most scholars would have dismissed it as a decorative relic, its geographical details long superseded by more accurate surveys. His mind possessed a restless curiosity, an itch to peel back the layers of the known and peer into the blank spaces that mapmakers so often left as cautionary voids. He traced a calloused finger along a familiar coastline, then along the jagged peaks of a mountain range he had himself charted years ago. It was all there, rendered with a skill that spoke of an era when cartography was as much an art as a science. Then his finger stopped. A region, roughly in the center of the vast, uncharted eastern expanse, was marked with symbols that Elias had never encountered. They weren't any known script, nor were they the rudimentary pictograms of primitive tribes. These were intricate, almost geometric glyphs, etched with an ink that, under the afternoon sun slanting through the window, seemed to shimmer with an internal, faint luminescence. The cartographer's instinct screamed that this was no mere decoration. It was a deliberate marking, and it depicted something that simply should not be there. The lines coalesced into what appeared to be a colossal maze-like structure, a sprawling network of paths and passages that dwarfed any city Elias knew. It was labeled, in a script subtly different from the rest of the map, with a single evocative name: the Whispering Labyrinth. A thrill, cold and sharp, traced its way down Elias's spine. The Whispering Labyrinth. The name itself was a ghost from obscure folklore, a legend whispered by sailors and dismissed by academics as a fanciful myth. A place of forgotten knowledge, a repository of ancient, perhaps dangerous truths. Most believed it was a poetic metaphor, not a physical location. But here, etched in shimmering ink on a centuries-old map, was undeniable proof, or at least the most compelling hint, that it might be real. Master Thorne, Elias started, his hand instinctively covering the anomalous section of the map. Lyra, his apprentice, stood in the doorway, a stack of scrolls in her arms, her bright eyes taking in the intensity of his focus. Lyra was young, barely 18, with an eagerness that Elias found both endearing and occasionally exhausting. Her mind was as sharp as his own, though her experience was limited to the well-trodden paths of Viridian scholarship. "Ah, Lyra, come in, child," Elias said, his voice a little too loud, betraying his agitation. He quickly turned the map face down, just examining some rather intriguing historical inaccuracies. Lyra set the scrolls down on a cluttered table. "You usually find joy in correcting them, Master Thorne." She tilted her head, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You look as if you've discovered a new continent." Elias paused, considering her. Lyra possessed an uncanny intuition, a sharpness that belied her years. He couldn't quite articulate what he had found, not yet. The legend was too potent, the implications too vast. But he felt a profound shift, a tectonic plate of his lifelong work grinding against something ancient and unknown. "Perhaps," he murmured, his gaze drifting back to the hidden map, a new obsession already taking root. "Perhaps something far more significant than a new continent, Lyra. Perhaps a new understanding of the old ones." He tapped the covered map with his knuckles. "The labyrinth, if it exists, it holds secrets that could rewrite history." Lyra's eyes widened, the playful curiosity replaced by a flicker of something more serious. She had heard the whispers of the labyrinth too, in hushed tones among scholars and travelers. "But that's just a story, isn't it? A fable to scare children." Elias met her gaze, his own filled with a newfound resolve. Stories, Lyra, are often the echoes of forgotten truths, and I believe I have found the map to one of the greatest truths ever lost. He stood, the decision forming with the certainty of a sunrise. I must prepare for a journey. The journey to the monastery of St. Jerome was a pilgrimage Elias Thorne had undertaken many times before, but never with such fervent urgency. Nestled in the rugged hills overlooking the eastern plains, its ancient stone walls seemed to hum with the weight of centuries. This was no casual visit for scholarly discourse. Elias sought the deepest, most obscure corners of its legendary library, a place where time seemed to congeal around the preserved whispers of forgotten ages. He was accompanied by Lyra, who, despite the arduous trek, navigated the winding paths with a quiet determination. Her usual youthful exuberance was tempered by the gravity of Elias's quest, and she absorbed his every word, her mind a sponge for the fragmented lore he unearthed. Elias, for his part, carried the precious map, now carefully protected and stored in a reinforced leather tube, along with the tattered journal he had meticulously pieced together from the auction lot, a journal from a navigator named Silas who had vanished nearly a century prior, his last entries hinting at a perilous discovery. Within the cool, dim confines of the library, they were greeted by Brother Alban, a man whose age seemed etched into the very stones of the monastery. His eyes, though clouded with cataracts, held a depth of knowledge that made him one of Viridia's most sought-after, albeit reclusive scholars. His hands, gnarled like ancient roots, moved with a gentle reverence as he guided Elias through aisles of towering shelves, each laden with scrolls and tomes that had survived wars, fires, and the slow erosion of time. "You seek the labyrinth, Master Thorne." Brother Alban's voice was a dry rustle, like turning brittle pages. A dangerous subject for study. Most scholars consider it a phantasm, a cautionary tale for those who delve too deeply into the abyss of the unknown. "And yet, brother," Elias countered, his voice low but firm, "fables often hold the kernels of truth. I have found evidence. A map, unlike any I have ever seen, depicting this whispering labyrinth as a tangible place." Brother Alban led them to a section far from the more frequented alcoves, a place where the air felt heavy and still. He pulled down a large, leather-bound volume, its cover embossed with faded gold leaf. "There are legends, Master Thorne, far older than our recorded histories, of a civilization that predated the old kingdoms. They called themselves the Lumina. Their understanding of the cosmos, of natural energies, of the very fabric of existence, was said to be unparalleled." He carefully opened the book, revealing intricate diagrams and archaic script. The Lumina did not build cities of stone and mortar as we do. Their creations were organic, responsive. They sought to preserve their knowledge, not through written word alone, but through a profound understanding of memory itself. The labyrinth, if such a place was indeed their creation, may not be merely a structure, but a repository of consciousness, a vast archive of thoughts, experiences, discoveries. Lyra leaned closer, her eyes wide. A repository of memory, so the whispers might indeed be echoes, Brother Alban confirmed, his gaze meeting Elias's. The Lumina foresaw a time when their knowledge could be lost, or worse, twisted. They built a safeguard, a place of immense power and wisdom, but also of profound challenge. The texts speak of guardians, of trials designed not to harm, but to discern, to test the seeker's intent and capacity. Elias's fingers tightened around the leather tube containing Silas's journal. "And the dangers, what do the texts warn of?" "They warn," Brother Alban said gravely, "that those who enter with greed or a desire for conquest will find only oblivion. That the labyrinth can reflect and amplify the deepest parts of one's soul, leading to madness or a complete loss of self. And that some knowledge, once unleashed, cannot be contained." He then gestured to Silas's journal. "This Silas you speak of, his last recorded position was near the Serpent's Tooth Peaks, a notoriously treacherous and isolated region. Few ventured there, and fewer returned. The old tales say that the entrance to the labyrinth was veiled, hidden by illusions, and accessible only to those who could perceive the subtle shifts in reality. Elias opened Silas's journal, the brittle pages crackling. He found the entry describing the Serpent's Tooth Peaks, along with a cryptic passage. Where the sun bleeds into the mist, and the stone weeps without rain, there the veil thins. It was a riddle, but it felt like a key. The Serpent's Tooth Peaks, Elias murmured, the name sending a shiver of anticipation through him. We will go there, Lyra. We will follow Silas's path. Lyra looked at Elias, then at the ancient texts Brother Alban had revealed. The mythical labyrinth was no longer just a legend. It was a destination, a place of profound discovery and untold peril. The weight of the world and its hidden history seemed to settle upon her young shoulders. Chapter 3. The Treacherous Path. The transition from the scholarly quiet of Viridia and the monastery to the raw, untamed wilderness was abrupt and humbling. Elias Thorne, Lyra, and their hired guide, Cale, set out from the last outpost of civilization, a collection of ramshackle buildings clinging to the edge of the known territories like barnacles to a ship's hull. Before them stretched an expanse of undulating plains that gradually gave way to dense, ancient forests, and beyond that the formidable, jagged silhouette of the Serpent's Tooth Mountains. Cale was a man forged by the wild. His face was a road map of weathered lines, his eyes sharp and perpetually scanning the horizon. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, his broad shoulders carrying a pack that seemed lighter than it ought to be. He had agreed to guide Elias for a generous sum, but his skepticism regarding their destination was palpable. Master Thorne, he'd grumbled, as they began their trek, his voice a low rumble. Legends are for campfires, not for crossing ground that's never seen a boot. The Serpent's Tooth is a place that swallows men whole. What business have you with its shadows? Elias, clutching Silas's journal and his own meticulously prepared maps, had simply replied, "A search for what lies beyond the shadows, Cale. A search for what is not yet known." The initial days were a testament to Cale's skill and the unforgetting nature of the land. They traversed forests so thick that the sunlight barely pierced the canopy, the air damp and alive with the rustling of unseen creatures. Elias, accustomed to the ordered precision of his study, found himself constantly disoriented, relying on Cale's instincts and his own increasingly invaluable compass. Lyra surprisingly thrived. The physical exertion seemed to invigorate her, and her keen observational skills, honed by Elias's tutelage, proved vital. She spotted faint game trails Cale might have overlooked, identified edible berries from poisonous lookalikes, and even alerted them to a precarious rock slide moments before it tumbled down the mountainside. As they climbed higher, the terrain grew more brutal. The forest thinned, giving way to windswept moors and treacherous scree slopes. The Serpent's Tooth Range lived up to its name, its peaks like fangs tearing at the sky, shrouded in a perpetual swirling mist that clung to the slopes like a shroud. The air grew thin and cold, and the constant wind seemed to carry an eerie, almost musical hum, a sound that Elias, attuned to the subtle vibrations of the earth he so often charted, found deeply unsettling. One evening, huddled around a meager fire as a storm raged around them, Cale gestured with his chin towards a peculiar cluster of trees near their camp. "Never seen those before," he muttered, his brow furrowed. "They're not like anything else in these parts." Almost sculpted. Elias, his own gaze drawn to the unnaturally uniform shapes of the ancient trees, felt a prickle of recognition. Silas's journal had spoken of signs, of the landscape itself hinting at the approach to the labyrinth. He examined the bark of the nearest tree. It was smooth, devoid of the usual knots and fissures, almost as if it had been polished. The wind whistled through its branches with a peculiar resonant tone, a note that seemed to echo the hum he had been hearing. "The labyrinth does not advertise its presence, Cale," Elias said, his voice hushed. "It blends, it conceals, perhaps even guides." Cale grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from agreement to outright disbelief, but Elias saw a flicker of something new in his eyes, a grudging respect, perhaps even a touch of apprehension. The wild was full of mysteries, but this felt different. This felt ancient, deliberate. Following Silas's cryptic clue, where the sun bleeds into the mist, and the stone weeps without rain, they pushed on the next day, Elias constantly scanning the horizon, Lyra observing the subtle shifts in the mist patterns, and Cale navigating the treacherous slopes with practiced ease. The humming in the air grew more pronounced, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate in their very bones. Elias felt an increasingly strong sense of being watched, not by any living creature, but by the land itself. The air felt charged, expectant. They were close. Then as the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long golden shafts through the thick swirling mist, they rounded a colossal boulder. And there, bathed in the ethereal glow, was a sight that stole their breath. Chapter 4: The Veiled Entrance. The boulder Elias, Lyra, and Cale rounded was not merely colossal. It was a sentinel, a gargantuan mass of ancient moss-covered stone that seemed to have been placed with deliberate intent. Beyond it, the mist did not disperse but seemed to thicken, swirling in mesmerizing, almost conscious patterns. And within this swirling veil, bathed in the slanting golden light of the descending sun, stood an archway. It was not an archway of crude construction, nor of any style known to Viridian architecture or its ancestral predecessors. Carved from a stone that seemed to absorb and refract the light, it rose majestically, its curves impossibly smooth, its surface seamless as if it had been born from the earth, rather than hewn from it. It was so perfectly integrated with its surroundings, so draped in vines and veiled by mist, that it would have been invisible to any but the most determined observer. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. His gaze swept over the arch, his eyes locking onto the symbols etched into its apex. They were the same intricate, almost geometric glyphs from his map, identical to the luminous ink that had first ignited his quest. Silas's riddle echoed in his mind, where the sun bleeds into the mist, and the stone weeps without rain. He looked at the arch. The stone itself seemed to shimmer, and in places, faint rivulets of moisture, not from any discernible source of water, tracked down its surface like silent tears. By the makers, Cale breathed, his gruff skepticism finally and utterly dissolved, replaced by a profound awe. He had seen many wonders in his travels, but nothing that evoked such a deep sense of ancient power. Lyra stood frozen, her eyes wide, taking in the impossible vista. She felt it too, a subtle vibration in the air, a low hum that was no longer just a sound but a sensation, resonating from the archway itself. It felt like the breath of something colossal, something that had slept for millennia. Elias, his hands trembling slightly, approached the arch. He reached out, his fingertips brushing against the cool, smooth stone. It felt strangely alive, humming with a latent energy. As his skin made contact, the symbols on the arch pulsed with a soft internal light, and the very air around it seemed to warp. Then, with a sound like a deep, resonant sigh, a section of the archway shimmered and receded, not sliding or opening, but dissolving inwards, revealing a passage shrouded in impenetrable darkness. The air emanating from the opening was cool, and carried a scent that was both earthy and strangely metallic, like ozone after a storm. Elias looked back at Lyra and Cale, his face alight with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. "This is it," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "The Whispering Labyrinth." Cale instinctively tightened his grip on the sturdy axe strapped to his pack. "It feels wrong, Master Thorn, like stepping into a place that doesn't want to be found." "But it has been found, Cale," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the dark passage, "and it holds secrets that have been hidden for far too long. We are prepared." He pulled out his trusty cartography tools, his compass, his measuring devices, and a set of charcoal sticks and parchment. He also retrieved a supply of torches from his pack, along with flint and steel. "The labyrinth has revealed its door. We must now venture within." Lyra nodded, her initial awe giving way to a steely resolve. She felt a pull, an irresistible curiosity about the ancient civilization that had built such a marvel. She met Elias's gaze, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the fading sun. "I'm ready, Master Thorn." With a final lingering look at the mist-shrouded valley, Elias lit the first torch. Its flickering flame cast dancing shadows on the ancient stone as he stepped forward into the darkness. Lyra followed close behind, her own torch illuminating the path, and Kale, his hand on his weapon, brought up the rear, his senses on high alert, ready to face whatever lay beyond the veil. The world outside, with its sun and wind and familiar sounds, receded with each step, and the silent, ancient embrace of the labyrinth enveloped them. Chapter 5. Echoes of Wisdom. The transition from the twilight of the entrance into the labyrinth's interior was not like entering a cave, but more like stepping into a different dimension. The torches Elias and Lyra carried cast a limited, wavering glow, yet the stone walls seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, creating an atmosphere of profound depth and stillness. The architecture was unlike anything Elias had ever documented. The walls were unnaturally smooth, as if grown from a single, colossal piece of polished obsidian, seamless and curving in ways that defied conventional construction. There were no visible joints, no tool marks, only flowing organic lines. The air inside was cool and still, carrying a faint, resonant hum that Elias had first noticed outside. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones, a deep, sonorous thrum that felt more like a presence than mere acoustics. The passageways twisted and turned in unexpected directions, often leading to chambers of varying size and complexity. Elias immediately set to work, his instincts as a cartographer kicking in. He unfurled a fresh piece of parchment, his charcoal poised. But mapping this place was proving to be an exercise in futility. Corridors that seemed to lead in one direction would subtly curve back, or open into spaces that defied logical spatial reasoning. The very dimensions of the labyrinth seemed to shift and reconfigure around them. In the center, a crystalline pillar pulsed with a soft internal light, casting ethereal patterns on the walls. They were so advanced. They saw the universe in a way we can't even comprehend. The patterns of the stars, the deep currents of the earth, the very essence of life. It's all here, stored. As she spoke, fleeting images flashed in Elias's mind. A glimpse of a city of light, a vision of celestial bodies in alignment, a feeling of profound interconnectedness. He realized Lyra wasn't just imagining things. She was acting as a conduit, her sensitivity picking up on the residual imprints of the Lumina. The labyrinth was not merely a physical structure. It was a repository of preserved consciousness, a library of minds. Kale, ever vigilant, kept his torch held high, scanning the shadows. He noticed subtle changes in the environment that Elias, engrossed in the intellectual puzzle, might have missed. The air temperature fluctuated slightly in certain areas, and the patterns on the walls, when viewed from a particular angle, seemed to subtly shift, forming intricate, almost holographic diagrams. "This place is more than stone and dust, Master Thorn," he stated, his voice low and respectful. "It's alive, in a way." In the center of the dome chamber near the pulsating crystal lay a series of small, intricately carved tablets, made of a material that felt like solidified light. Elias carefully picked one up. As he held it, a cascade of information flooded his mind. Not words, but pure concept, a distilled understanding of celestial mechanics far beyond anything known in his time. He felt a dizzying sense of comprehension, then a sudden, almost painful clarity. These were not simple artifacts. They were vessels of concentrated knowledge. Incredible, Elias breathed, his mind reeling. The Lumina truly did preserve their wisdom. This could change everything. But as he absorbed the profound knowledge, a subtle unease began to creep in. The sheer volume and complexity of what he was experiencing were overwhelming. It was like trying to drink from an ocean. And he wondered, as the ethereal patterns on the wall seemed to swirl with increasing intensity, what else might be stored within these whispering halls. Chapter 6. The Guardian's Test. The further Elias, Lyra, and Kale ventured into the labyrinth, the more the nature of the structure revealed itself. It was not merely a passive archive, but an active guardian of its secrets. The whispers Lyra perceived grew more coherent, less like random echoes and more like directed messages, while the very architecture seemed to respond to their presence, guiding them, or perhaps testing them, through a series of intricate challenges. They entered a chamber where the floor was inlaid with a complex mosaic of interlocking celestial symbols. Above them, the ceiling projected a shimmering, three-dimensional representation of the night sky, but it was distorted, incomplete. Elias recognized it as a star chart from a bygone era, but certain constellations were missing, and others appeared in incorrect positions. A deep, resonant voice, seemingly emanating from the very stones of the room, echoed around them, posing a riddle tied to the celestial anomaly. "To pass," the voice intoned, its timbre ancient and authoritative, "you must restore the sky's true balance, aligning the lost stars with their rightful place in the cosmic dance. Your understanding of the heavens will be your key." Elias's heart leaped. This was a test of intellect, a challenge tailored to his own expertise, yet amplified to a cosmic scale. He pulled out his precise astrolabe and began comparing the projected sky to the knowledge etched onto the crystalline tablets they had collected. Lyra, meanwhile, felt a different kind of pressure. The chamber seemed to resonate with the emotions of those who had previously attempted the puzzle, a confusing cacophony of frustration and despair. She focused, using the luminous wisdom she'd absorbed to filter the psychic noise, to find a quiet center within herself. "The Lumina didn't just observe the stars, Master Thorn," she said, her voice steady. "They understood their interconnectedness. The balance isn't just about placement, but about influence. There are forces at play we don't see." With Lyra's insight guiding his interpretation of the Lumina's astronomical principles, Elias began to manipulate the projected constellations, not just by moving them, but by understanding the subtle gravitational and energetic influences the Lumina had charted. It was a painstaking process, requiring him to recall astronomical patterns that had shifted over millennia and to integrate them with the Labyrinth's alien logic. After what felt like hours, with a soft chime, the projected sky snapped into perfect alignment. The resonant voice intoned, "Wisdom discerns the unseen connections. You are worthy." They moved on, Kale leading the way, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. The next challenge was more physical, though still imbued with the labyrinth's unique nature. They entered a vast, cavernous space where the floor was a shifting labyrinth of pressure plates and moving sections. Illusions flickered at the edges of their vision, images of dead ends, treacherous drops, and spectral figures that mimicked their own movements. The air crackled with a subtle, disorienting energy. "This tests not just your steps, but your resolve," the resonant voice declared, fainter this time, as if the labyrinth itself was becoming accustomed to their presence. "Doubt is a trap. Fear is a dead end. Your path lies in unwavering purpose." Kale took the lead, his movements deliberate and sure. He tested each plate not with haste, but with careful consideration, relying on his innate spatial awareness. He ignored the distracting illusions, his focus solely on the ground beneath his feet and the path ahead. When a spectral image of a monstrous beast lunged at him, he didn't flinch, simply walked through it, his mind fixed on his objective. Elias, though less physically adept, used his meticulous nature to observe Kale's patterns and predict the next safe step, while Lyra's heightened senses helped her discern the subtle shifts in the energy field, indicating areas of stability. They emerged from the shifting maze into a chamber filled with glowing orbs of light, each pulsing with a unique hue and frequency. As they approached, the resonant voice spoke one final time, softer now, almost a whisper. "Guard it well, for there are those who would extinguish it." Scattered around the chamber, Elias noticed peculiar stone fragments, broken pieces of what looked like ancient tools or artifacts, and chillingly, the faint outlines of skeletal remains, subtly integrated into the labyrinth's stonework. These were not warnings. They were the grim testament to those who had failed the Guardian's tests, those who had sought the labyrinth's secrets with the wrong intentions. The implication was clear: the labyrinth protected its knowledge not just from ignorance, but from malice. The Guardians were not just tests of intellect and courage, but of character. Chapter 7, The Shadow of Erasure. The chamber at the heart of the labyrinth was a stark contrast to the winding passages and testing chambers they had navigated. It was vast, circular, and bathed in a soft, pervasive luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. The walls here were not merely smooth. They were alive with intricate, ever-shifting patterns, complex geometries, and cosmic diagrams that pulsed with a gentle rhythm, like the slow beat of a heart. Elias felt a profound sense of awe, yet it was mingled with a growing, gnawing unease. This was not merely a repository of knowledge. It felt like a vault, a sanctuary, and perhaps a prison. Lyra stood at the center of the chamber, her hands outstretched, her eyes wide and unfocused. The luminous, fragmented thoughts that had echoed through the labyrinth were coalescing within her, forming a narrative far more complex and terrifying than Elias had anticipated. Her whispers grew more urgent, laced with a dawning horror. "They weren't just preserving knowledge, Elias," she said, her voice trembling. "They were hiding it from something, from a force that sought to control, to consume, to erase." She clutched her head, as if the visions were too much to bear. "I see it. A great darkness. It didn't want people to know. It wanted to keep them ignorant, to make them pliable. They built this labyrinth not just as a library, but as a shield. A way to safeguard the truth when the world outside started to forget, or worse, when powerful forces began to actively unmake history." Elias's own scholarly instincts were now grappling with a terrifying new paradigm. He looked at the intricate patterns on the walls, recognizing elements of advanced physics, of bioengineering, of philosophies that challenged the very foundations of their current understanding of reality. He remembered the cryptic warnings from Brother Albin, the cautionary tales of forgotten explorers, and then a chilling connection formed in his mind. He recalled specific historical events, periods of unexplained societal regression, the abrupt disappearance of entire schools of thought, the convenient burning of libraries, the subtle suppression of inconvenient discoveries. These weren't random occurrences. They were echoes of what Lyra was describing. He moved towards a section of the wall where the patterns seemed to coalesce into a more static, narrative form. Through the shimmering projections he saw the Lumina, not as serene scholars, but as desperate architects of a grand defense. He saw them struggling against an unseen enemy, an entity or organization that fed on ignorance and sought to homogenize thought. And then he saw a projection that made his blood run cold, a shadowy sigil, a symbol subtly different from the Lumina's own elegant designs, which appeared in conjunction with depictions of betrayal and the systematic destruction of knowledge. This sigil, he realized with a sickening lurch, was not entirely alien to him. He had glimpsed variations of it in obscure historical texts, often associated with clandestine societies and whispered rumors of individuals who sought to manipulate power from the shadows. This organization, Elias murmured, his voice tight with a dawning dread. The ones who wanted to erase what the Lumina represented. They still exist. They have to. He felt a profound, chilling certainty that this shadowy group, an unseen hand guiding the course of history by pruning away inconvenient truths, was still active in his own time, or had been in the recent past. Their goal wasn't just ignorance, but active erasure, a deliberate attempt to rewrite reality by removing the evidence of what truly was. Lyra nodded, tears streaming down her face. They are still searching. They want to find this place, to either destroy its knowledge or to twist it for their own ends. The labyrinth, it's not just protecting secrets. It's protecting reality itself from being unmade. Kale, who had been warily observing the chamber, felt a prickling unease that went beyond mere physical danger. It was a sense of being observed by something vast and ancient, something that regarded their presence with a cold, analytical gaze. "Master Thorn," he said, his voice low and urgent, "this place feels watched. Not by us, but by something. A presence. And I don't think it's the Lumina." The patterns on the wall pulsed more intensely, and for a terrifying moment, Elias felt a discordant, invasive energy trying to breach the labyrinth's sanctity. The signature of the very force Lyra and the Lumina had sought to contain. The labyrinth, he realized, was not just a historical artifact. It was a weapon, a fortress, and a prison, guarding against a threat that had been subtly shaping the world for millennia. And they had just stumbled into the heart of its war. Chapter 8. The Unseen Hand. The realization that they had stumbled into a centuries-old battle for the very fabric of history settled heavily upon Elias, Lyra, and Kale. The awe they had felt upon entering the labyrinth had been replaced by a grim understanding of its true purpose. It wasn't just a repository of lost knowledge, it was a failsafe, a bastion against a pervasive, insidious force. As they began to retrace their steps, the labyrinth's subtle energies shifted, becoming more agitated, more aware. The once subtle hum now carried a dissonant undertone, as if the ancient mechanism was reacting to an external threat. The Lumina foresaw this, Elias murmured, his mind racing. He recalled historical records he had dismissed as apocryphal, tales of influential figures who championed ignorance, of sudden shifts in societal direction that seemed to have no logical cause. These weren't just periods of darkness. They were acts of calculated erasure, orchestrated by unseen hands. This shadowy organization, they've been systematically pruning history, removing inconvenient truths, manipulating collective understanding for their own gain. The labyrinth holds the proof, the original record. Lyra, her sensitivity now a double-edged sword, felt a distinct pressure, a foreign presence trying to probe the labyrinth's defenses. It was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the Lumina's vibrant energy. "They're here," she whispered, her voice strained. "Or at least, their influence is. I can feel them trying to distort the echoes, to twist the paths. They know we're here." Kale, his hand now perpetually on the hilt of his weapon, his senses on high alert, scanned the shifting corridors. He hadn't seen anything, heard anything out of the ordinary for an ancient, echoing structure. Yet the primal instinct of danger prickled at his skin. It was the feeling of being hunted, not by a physical predator but by something far more subtle and pervasive. He noticed peculiar distortions in the light ahead, fleeting shadows that seemed to detach themselves from the walls, and a faint, almost imperceptible chill that had nothing to do with the labyrinth's ambient temperature. "If they've been actively trying to erase history," Kale said, his voice low and steady, "then they would surely want to eliminate any evidence, anyone who could reveal their actions. We're not just intruders, Master Thorn. We're liabilities." As they navigated a particularly complex junction, Elias noticed a subtle anomaly in the Lumina's pristine architecture. A section of the wall seemed scuffed, as if something metallic had scraped against it recently. And nearby, embedded in the smooth stone, was a small, tarnished silver pin, bearing a symbol Elias recognized with a jolt of dread, a stylized owl, an emblem he'd once seen associated with a powerful, clandestine guild of information brokers who dealt in secrets and in their suppression. This was the sigil he had glimpsed in the heart chamber, refined and modernized. It felt like a trap, a sophisticated system designed to disorient and incapacitate intruders, perhaps even to induce memory loss, making them forget what they had seen. "Hold," Elias commanded, pulling Lyra and Kale back. "This is not the labyrinth's will, it's theirs." Lyra cried out, clutching her head. It's trying to unravel my thoughts, to make me forget, to make us forget." The visions she had experienced were starting to fray, becoming jumbled and nonsensical. Kale pushed them both behind a thick, crystalline pillar. "We need to move. This place is turning against us." Elias knew instinctively that the labyrinth's core was now under siege. The unseen hand had reached into this ancient sanctuary, and its agents were actively working to blind the world further. They had to escape, not just for their own survival, but to preserve the truth they had glimpsed. The labyrinth was not just a treasure trove of lost knowledge. It was a battlefield, and they had just realized they were on the front lines of a war waged in the shadows of history. The question was no longer just what they had found, but what they could possibly do with it, and how they could possibly survive its revelation. Chapter 9. The Price of Truth. The labyrinth, once a beacon of ancient wisdom, now felt like a treacherous maze actively working against them. The pressure Lyra felt intensified, a suffocating weight attempting to unravel the precious knowledge she had absorbed. Elias, clutching the silver owl pin, understood the chilling implications. This wasn't a random defense mechanism. It was a sophisticated system, designed by their adversaries to neutralize any threat to their carefully constructed narrative of history. Memory, the very essence of the labyrinth, was their target. "We need to get out," Kale urged, his voice strained as he shielded Lyra from the disorienting energy pulses. "This place is compromised. We can't fight whatever they've put in here." Elias nodded, his mind a whirlwind of thought. The Lumina had built this sanctuary to preserve truth, but they had also foreseen the danger of its misuse. His earlier awe had morphed into a profound sense of responsibility. The knowledge they had glimpsed, the advanced science, the forgotten philosophies, the very history of how their world had been shaped and manipulated, was a power of unimaginable magnitude. In the hands of the shadowy organization, it could be weaponized to solidify their control. But revealed to the world, it could shatter the established order, sparking chaos or enlightenment depending on humanity's readiness. As they navigated the increasingly unstable corridors, the labyrinth seemed to guide them, not with gentle whispers, but with a sense of desperate urgency, pushing them towards the exit. Lyra, though visibly struggling, managed to focus. They're not just trying to make us forget," she gasped. "They're trying to implant false memories, to overwrite what we've learned. They want us to believe this was all a hallucination." Elias felt a surge of protective fury. He wouldn't let them erase what they had found, what the Lumina had so desperately guarded. He looked at the crystalline tablets they had managed to collect, small vessels of pure knowledge, and then at the map he had meticulously drawn, a flawed but essential record of their journey. These were their only tangible proofs. They reached the outer chambers, the air growing less charged, the humming resonance of the Lumina slowly reasserting itself, fighting against the foreign interference. The entrance, a shimmering portal in the mist, was just ahead. But as they approached, a figure stepped out of the swirling vapor. Clad in dark, practical clothing, the man was unremarkable save for his eyes, sharp, cold, and filled with a predatory intelligence. He held a device that hummed with a low, discordant energy, similar to what they had encountered deeper within. "Masters Thorn and Lyra, I presume," the man said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. "And the mercenary. A pity you ventured so far. Such discoveries are best left undisturbed." He raised the device. "The Council thanks you for your brief tour. Now for the final redaction." Kale moved instantly, stepping between the man and Elias and Lyra, his axe raised. "Get behind me." Elias knew they couldn't fight their way out. Their goal was not confrontation, but escape, and the preservation of the truth. He looked at Lyra, a desperate plan forming in his mind. "Lyra," he said, his voice urgent, "the tablets, what do you feel from them? Can you project it? Even a fragment?" Lyra, despite her exhaustion, understood. She clutched the collected tablets, their light pulsing faintly against her skin. Focusing all her remaining strength, she tried to channel the Lumina's wisdom, not as detailed information, but as a raw wave of sensory input, a disorienting burst of pure, unadulterated knowledge that clashed with the agent's device. The agent staggered back, his device sputtering violently as Lyra's focus projection met his suppression technology. It wasn't a weapon, but a shock wave of pure truth, designed to overload the crude mechanisms of erasure. In that instant of distraction, Kale shoved Elias and Lyra towards the entrance. "Go!" Kale roared, engaging the agent, his axe clanging against the man's surprisingly resilient tools. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled Lyra through the shimmering veil, the chaotic energy of the labyrinth's compromised exit momentarily blinding them. As they stumbled out into the twilight of the hidden valley, the archway behind them flickered and seemed to solidify, the passage receding as if it had never been. They heard the distant clash of steel, then a sharp cry from Kale. They had escaped, but the price was steep. They had lost Kale, their loyal protector, and the labyrinth itself, its entrance now sealed, its deepest secrets potentially locked away forever, or worse, already tainted by the unseen hand. Elias clutched the tablets in his map, the weight of their burden now heavier than ever. They carried the truth, but the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty and the looming threat of an enemy who dealt in the ultimate weapon. Chapter 10. The Unfolding Map. The return to Viridia was a journey steeped in a profound, unsettling silence. Elias, Thorn, and Lyra moved through the familiar streets, as strangers in their own city. The bustling marketplace, the calls of vendors, the distant chime of the city clock, all seemed muted, distant, as if observed through a thick pane of glass. The world Elias had meticulously charted on parchment was now revealed to be a carefully constructed facade, hiding layers of forgotten history and deliberate obfuscation. Their expedition into the Whispering Labyrinth had not only unearthed secrets, it had fundamentally altered their perception of reality. The loss of Kale weighed heavily on Elias. His courage and sacrifice had bought them their escape, but the thought of him trapped, or worse, captured, haunted Elias's waking moments. The silver owl pin, still clutched in Elias's hand, was a constant, grim reminder of the pervasive reach of the organization they had so narrowly eluded. Back in Elias's study, the familiar scent of ink and aging paper now felt strangely alien. The maps spread across his table, once symbols of ordered knowledge, now seemed incomplete, naive. The labyrinth's crystalline tablets lay carefully wrapped, their stored wisdom a powerful, yet terrifying burden. Elias understood the luminous final warning. Knowledge was a flame, and this particular flame could illuminate the world or ignite a conflagration. Revealing the full truth, the extent of the historical manipulation, the existence of the shadowy council, could shatter Viridia's fragile peace, plunging it into chaos or worse. Drawing the full, destructive attention of their adversaries, "We cannot simply present what we found," Elias said, his voice hoarse. He looked at Lyra, who sat by the window, gazing out at the familiar cityscape with eyes that had seen far beyond it. "They would dismiss us as madmen, or worse, they would silence us permanently. The council, they are masters of erasure." Lyra nodded slowly. Her own experience within the labyrinth had changed her profoundly. The echoes of Lumina wisdom had not simply filled her mind, they had resonated within her, granting her an intuitive understanding of the subtle currents of history, a sensitivity to the discrepancies and omissions that permeated the accepted narratives. "But we cannot keep silent, Master Thorn. The Lumina guarded their knowledge for a reason. It needs to be known, understood, not forgotten again." Elias picked up a fresh piece of parchment. He traced the familiar coastline of Eldoria, but then paused. He began to add subtle annotations not of geographical features, but of historical footnotes, of forgotten folklore, of discrepancies in established timelines. He wouldn't declare war, not yet. Instead, he would wage a campaign of subtle reintroduction. He would begin to subtly remap the world, not just geographically, but historically, weaving the threads of lost knowledge back into the tapestry of accepted fact, one overlooked detail, one resurrected anecdote at a time. "The labyrinth gave us the truth," Elias declared, his resolve hardening. "And now we must become its guardians, not by hiding it, but by carefully, strategically, unfurling it. We will introduce questions where there were once answers. We will sow seeds of doubt about the official record. We will teach people to look beyond the obvious." Lyra met his gaze, a flicker of her youthful spark returning. Now tempered with a new, quiet strength, she understood her role. She was no longer just an apprentice. She was a keeper of secrets, a conduit for forgotten wisdom. She might even, she suspected, find ways to perceive the subtle manipulations of the council, to sense when historical narratives were being deliberately skewed. The Lumina's knowledge had imprinted itself upon her, not just as facts, but as a guiding principle. The story of the Whispering Labyrinth would not be a grand public revelation. It would be a quiet, persistent unfolding. Elias would continue his cartography, but his maps would become richer, more layered, hinting at the depths beneath the surface. Lyra, with her burgeoning intuition, would assist him, her insights guiding their work, subtly correcting the course of knowledge. Kale's sacrifice would not be forgotten. It would be the catalyst for their continued vigilance. As the sun set over Viridia, casting long shadows that mirrored the hidden depths of history, Elias Thorn and Lyra Thorn, the cartographer and his apprentice, stood ready. They had faced the heart of a forgotten truth and survived. They had seen the shadow of erasure and understood its power. Their journey into the labyrinth had ended, but their true work, the quiet, arduous task of remapping a world that had forgotten its own past, had just begun. The map of Eldoria was about to become far more complex and far more honest.